Okay, looks like we are all set. What is the role of transparency and legality in this environment? Let me address your speech, Magda, with a question. Is transparency only a top-down issue? So can we just be transparent to the authorities, or shall we use transparency in the modern way, which is from bottom up? Being transparent to as many stakeholders as possible, so to distribute control as opposed to centralize control, first. Second, is transparency just a legal issue, or is it a business issue that creates bridges, standards, layers of interoperability? Can we make transparency a driver of economic value as opposed to a cost? With these premises, I lend you the mic. Please, Magda.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Like that? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be again at the ECRF annual conference. Happy to see many known faces and a few that I don't necessarily recognize. As many of you probably know, I work at the Commission on the project related to the interconnection of business registers, which we call BRIS. However, today I'm not going to talk about BRIS. Maybe just a little bit. And I'll be opening this session on data transparency and legality. So coming here was actually a little bit of a challenge for me because I had to ask myself, transparency. What is transparency? When we all talk about transparency, it seems to me that we give different meanings to the concept. And I did a little research, and indeed, even different organizations around the world seem to give transparency slightly different meaning. Transparency, seems to refer to, for example, government activities. The citizens are entitled to know what their government does. So it's about access to data and information about what our government does. If you look into the business environment, we talk about transparency in terms of access to data about companies, for example, disclosure of information about what companies do. The OECD talks about tax transparency. So really, it seems to me very different organizations talk about different areas of transparency, so different meanings that they give to the word. Another thing that crossed my mind is to say, well, what does it mean exactly, transparency? It means everything is open, accessible, reliable, there's cooperation between partners, everything is good. But in reality, I think many times there are doubts about transparencies. We don't seem to be certain that there is enough transparency, that there is full transparency. We still have a feeling that there is not complete access to data, which means there would be transparency if we have access to data. There is legislation around to ensure transparency. However, is it enough? There's always that question in our mind. Can we do more? And sure enough, there's always risk of corruption and law infringement, and that actually breaches transparency. It's lacking transparency. The other thing that I'm sorry, I forgot about my little slide, which was meant to say that. Another thing that I asked myself was, why do we need transparency? Everyone seems to be slightly obsessed with transparency. We need transparency. I think we need that because it gives us the feeling of accountability. We know who is accountable for what's happening. And it gives us the feeling of trust again, in the government, in the business environment that we live in. We have the right to know what's going on. And if there is no transparency, well, everything seems to be slightly negative then. We don't have enough confidence. We feel that there is risk of financial crime or other sorts of crime around. And I think lacking transparency, we miss opportunities, business opportunities, for example. So this is important. I think everyone agrees on that. Having said that, I'm now moving on a little bit towards the business registers and data on companies, which is more it's closer to why we are here and why we are discussing about data and business registers. And I put the business registers, as you see, in the middle. The data comes primarily from companies, and it's there for different kinds of users to be used. But those who store this data, in many, many cases, are the business registers. And for me, that's a very important role. If there is anything maybe missing on this slide, on the side of users, where I put all sorts of types of human users, if you wish, I think I should have added machines and systems, because access to data can also be for machines, for other systems. Moving on a little bit, since I'm here on behalf of the Commission, I have to talk about EU legislation. I can't not do that. So, of course, I can only give a few examples without getting into any details on how EU legislation is trying to ensure transparencies on companies. We have company law directives with a long list of documents that should be filed and available for the public in the business registers. We have some accounting directives which also require that companies disclose financial information. Very briefly, I will also mention the legislation on anti-money laundering, which is now being revised. I'm sure many of you here know what's going on or follow up on it. And I also mention the Transparency Directive. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with that. There is a requirement for listed companies to disclose information on regulated markets. This data is not filed in the business registers. There are other authorities called officially appointed mechanisms, usually the stock exchange or the central banks who store information, but it's also for the purpose of ensuring transparency. So these are really just a few examples of EU legislation that is trying to promote transparency. And now a little bit about the BRIS project, because even if maybe transparency is not the main thing that you associate with BRIS, in the end, it is about data, and it is about ensuring, first of all, access to data at EU level, and also about ensuring that the data stored in the registers, when it comes through to cross-border activities, is up to date. And these are really two of the fundamental purposes of establishing BRIS. Okay. And now with the challenges. We all agree we need transparency, and we all agree more should be done. However, how do we strike the balance? There are many concerns about protection of personal data. There should be access to data. However, how do we ensure the personal rights to protect your data? Should everything be public? Should everything be available for everyone? Or should it be somehow restricted to those who really, really need to have access to that on a need-to-know basis? What about the companies? In the end, all the data comes from the companies themselves, and sometimes that creates a burden on them and the cost, of course. So how do you strike the balance there? The more you ask, maybe the more burden you create on companies. And then when it comes to cross-border access to information, there's always barriers, language barriers, and not only. How do you find a good way to ensure transparency at all levels, national or transnational, and deal with all these challenges? So having said that, I'm not going to give you too many answers, I'm afraid, today. Instead, I'm going to launch some questions for everyone, whether for the panel or for everyone in the room. And I would like to see what you think in terms of access to data. Do we need access to more data? Is it not enough what we see? Or do we need more access, meaning more people should have access, or more systems should be connected to get access to their data? Do we need more legislation, do you think? Is it not enough what we have already in place? What about enforcement? Because in the end, let's remember, the data comes from the company. So at the end of the chain, we rely on what they give us. So how do we make sure that it's all updated, starting with the companies that have an obligation to to file certain data. So that is all from me. I really hope for some reactions from you or from the members of the panel.
Thank you, Magda. We'll have. Be sure you will have my reaction in a few minutes. Let me lend the floor to my friend Michele Ricciardi, professor from Università Cattolica and expert from transcrime. That sounds very, very CSI to my ears. Please, Michele.
Yeah, unfortunately it's not, but Transcrime is a research center of the Università Cattolica of Milan, which deals usually with organized crime issues, money laundering, corruption. And today I would like exactly to focus on the role that business registers play or may play in combating and in controlling, in preventing crime. As Magdalena focuses on transparency, I would focus on legality. So, can I have the button? Thank you.
If you insist, yes.
So, I would like to start telling you a story. So, we are in the city of Fellini, of Dolce Vita, and so let's think this is a movie. And the main star of this movie is a company, which we call Colosseo Limited. So, it's a completely fictitious company. Although, if you look across European business registers, you will find about 25 of Colosseo Limited. Okay? So this company is a public construction company, and one day their managers are found to pay a bribe to a local officers of a regional government. An investigation starts, and the investigation finds that the shareholders of Colosseo Limited are close to some mafia members. Okay, so the judge, the prosecutor is bringing this case in is a criminal proceeding, and he's able to prove this mafia connection. So thanks to the to the relevant legislation, the company is confiscated. So what happens next? First, the national authority entitled to deal with confiscated assets has to decide what to do with the confiscated company. So shall it be liquidated or shall it be kept alive? And meanwhile, the local government, which we hypothesize that is a new one, asked to prevent new cases of illegality like this one. So it asks, how can risky companies be identified before the crime occurs? So in this story, in this movie, I've asked myself which would be the role played by business registers. And my answer is that they basically play, or they may play, a crucial role in each of these scenes. So first of all, during the investigation, this is nothing new. The investigators ask, who is behind Colosseo Limited? And obviously, business register can have an answer to this question. During the criminal proceeding, because legal official documents are needed to prove this mafia association, and business register can provide these documents. But also, and this is something more new in my opinion, they are quite crucial in the management of confiscated companies. Why? Because the national authority has to understand if the company, Colosseo, is profitable, if it is worth to keep it alive, or if it is better to liquidate this company. And maybe this is a problem that you do not face in your country, because in many countries companies are not confiscated. But in Italy, as we will soon see, we have about 2,000 companies confiscated, and this is a big problem. But a business register may play a role also in the risk assessment exercise. So how can they contribute to identify the risky business area before crime occurs? Now, as you know, keeping this metaphor of the movie, as you know, we as Italians often send some promising actors to Hollywood to learn, to train. And so I've asked myself, which skills should business register improve in order to be maybe better actors. So I just listed some of them. These are findings of a few projects, including Project Bonnet, which perhaps you have heard about it. So first of all, in my opinion, the quality of the information on administration, or the administrators and owners and on beneficial owners must be improved in terms of reliability, in terms of timeliness, of completeness of this information. Then access to official, legal, certified documents shall be improved. And in my opinion, this is a strong point of business register which distinguishes them from private business data providers. This is something that, if I understand well, public business register has a sort of monopoly on the provision of these legal official documents. Quite important is the improvement of systems allowing cross-border queries. So I have to mention a European-funded ongoing project, which is eBox, where some of business register here represented, among them Infocamere, participating. So improving the interconnection among business register, or if you pass me a joke, improving the interconnection among interconnection projects, as it seems that there are quite many in Europe at this moment. And also to improve the more user-friendly access. If you speak with many police officers at EU level, you can find that they have problems whenever they have to access to business register with a credit card, because they cannot rely on a company credit card. So this is something that must be kept in mind. Credit card access seems a quite improvement, big advancement, but it can cause problems to certain users. Improve the links to other sources of information, improve data on peers, competitors, and also aggregate statistics. We saw the potential of having aggregate statistics in Spain before, or in Italy, so this is a direction that must be improved. But what would be the issue that would allow the actor business register to win the Oscar Academy Awards? In my opinion, that would be related somehow to how business register can contribute in terms of risk assessment tools. Now, risk assessment, and let's define very briefly what a risk assessment can be. Basically, is any kind of exercise which allow you to identify any risky areas where, for example, in the field of money laundering, so which are the business sectors where money laundering is most common, is most frequent. And this issue of risk assessment is on the top of the political agenda. Money laundering, we just mentioned the revision of the third anti-money laundering directive, so the so-called fourth, and it calls for national risk assessment exercise. We have just had one in Italy, and you will have in any other European countries. Or a risk assessment about corruption. The Italian government has recently asked all of its more than 8,000 municipalities to produce a risk assessment of corruption in their sectors, which are the areas which are most risky. But also it's crucial in the private sector, as risk assessment is behind the so-called customer due diligence of banks, for example, or in the management of the security of a supply chain of private company. So we spoke with pharmaceutical companies, and they are very worried about the risk of theft of medicines in Italy. And so they ask themselves, what are the most risky couriers or logistic company? Can I prevent to hire, to work with these companies? To give an example of risk assessment, I would like to tell a story which I hope will be interesting of a risk assessment that our center did about the infiltration of mafias in companies in Italy. Not just in Italy, actually, but also at EU level. The European project is going to be concluded by November 2014, while the Italian one has already concluded. So we asked ourselves which business areas in Italy are at highest risk of mafia infiltration, and we tried to answer this question by, as suggested in the previous panel, by combining different data. So crime data, statistics on confiscated assets, and also data from business registers. So here you can see some results. So this is our beloved Italian boot, and it represents, it maps the rate between confiscated companies and registered companies. So the first is data given by the Ministry of the Interior. The second is data taken from business registers. And the darker the area, the higher this rate. And this map basically confirms many of the evidence that we know that southern Italy is most affected, but gives also some useful information. If you look at the north, in the north there are some areas, some provinces which are quite dark, especially one which is in the Lake District, famous for George Clooney yachters, okay, villas. It is the province in Italy with the highest rate between confiscated restaurants and registered restaurants. This is the data which tell about this, and it can be a useful information for both public agencies and private agencies when doing prevention, when deciding where to strengthen the monitoring. And the same can be done looking at business sectors. So, trying to avoid any technicality, we produce an indicator which says how important is a certain business sector in the mafia economy with respect to the Italian legal economy. So if this indicator is 1, such as in the case of wholesale and retail trade, this means that this sector has the same importance among both mafia companies and registered companies. If it is higher than 1, this means that the sector is more important among mafia companies rather than legal companies. And if you look at this chart, which represents just few of the sectors, you will see that agriculture and manufacturing are not very important among mafia businesses, while construction and mining and quarrying are. Construction weighs about 2 times among confiscated companies rather than in Italian registered companies, while mining and quarrying weigh 15. Why this? Because it is crucial for many reasons. Because it is in the center of the cement cycle, which is crucial for mafias, but also it is used for stocking illegal waste, for example. So this could provide some score, some risk score about, again, the risk of mafia infiltration, which could be attributed to companies. We did also an analysis of the mafia companies combining data from business registers in terms of financial statements. And it is interesting to see that they have a certain well-identifiable profile. In most cases, they are limited liability companies. Their profitability is in line or even lower than legal companies. They have low financial and bank debts, high trade payables, low level of property, plant equipment, and most of the assets are held in cash or current activities. So now, this, beyond being a, let's say, a criminological/financial analysis, can provide with a set of what we call predictors or red flags of indicators that can be used for the identification of risky companies. So these were just a few examples of how business registered data can contribute to the risk assessment exercise. We had about 50 years of credit risk assessment or credit risk indicators. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they have not worked. I think we shall also improve the building, the construction of indicators about money laundering, infiltration, and corruption. So, to conclude, I think that business register play or may play a crucial role in many stages of the contrast to illegality. So, for investigation purposes, for the management of criminal assets, or for assessment of risk prevention. And this obviously enlarges, widens the group of potential users. This creates new market opportunities. But it implies that business registers have to face some challenges in terms of improving some data, some services. And one thing which is quite important is that also the interconnection between register and research, mainly OECD or Bocconi University, or why not Transcrime, shall be strengthened, because data is not enough. There is the need also for criteria to interpret the data and to use them in a proper way. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. Okay, next is Gilles, Secretary General of XBRL Europe. And Gilles will give us his view on how transparency can actually be a business challenge and not just a legal or criminal challenge, and how we can move forward towards a higher level of transparency that becomes, again, a public good, bridging the silos of data together. Gilles?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Vito and Infocamere, to have invited me for this presentation. I'm Gilles Maguet, the Secretary General of XBRL Europe. But what is XBRL? In fact, Anna Maria De Valle has expressed that it is used in some countries, in fact. But first, I don't know if everyone knows what is XBRL. I'm sure that some business registers, they don't know. In fact, this is a standard, sorry. Correct. Technology. Transparency. So you will see that XBRL is a stakeholder, in fact, for transparency. XBRL, this is a standard for the electronic exchange of business information. It is built on XBRL in a more powerful way as to structure complex data with additional functionalities. These functionalities, in fact, are like visualization, calculation, data validation, formula, and so on. The data elements are defined in a taxonomy, a dictionary. This is a sort of clever chart of account, in fact, for describing the context of data. And an XBRL instance document contains the data elements which are following XBRL taxonomy. I'm sorry, I was thinking that it was important just to remind everyone what XBRL is, in fact. Is it used? In fact, it is used a lot. When I was showing this kind of slide many years ago, in fact, there was just 4 or 5 projects. It was in 2005, 2006. Now we have 55 to 65 XBRL projects in 19 European countries for national reportings or European reportings through the EU directives. This is enormous, in fact. We can mention, for instance, the banking regulated sector. There are more than 13 projects. Plus, in addition, the new CRD4 directive, which is imposing the new taxonomy. So more countries are going to use XBRL as a mandatory reporting from the banks. The same in the insurance sector. The securities market regulated sector, and I'm going to come back on that. We have already some projects. One which is very famous in Europe, this is the one from Spain, in fact, from the CNMV. The business register sector. This is a sector which is using a lot XBRL already. 13 projects have identified, for which 7 are for mandatory or quasi-mandatory filing for the reporting of the financial statements. The tax sector is also using XBRL a lot, in fact, already, and very close to the business register sector, the statistics and other sectors. So you see that this is heavily used. In the business register sectors, sorry, there is a mistake. This is not 3 projects, but 13 projects, 7 for mandatory or quasi-mandatory filing, mainly in local gaps. 2 or 3 are with national gaps, and the IFRS, like the UK, Denmark, and Germany. This is right, Sasha? Germany? That's right? Okay. I'm not sure totally about the figures. Maybe I'm here so you can correct me if I've made some mistakes concerning the filings. But I can mention Belgium, mandatory filing, 400,000 filings. Denmark, 210,000 filing. Italy, Infocamere, 1,200,000 filing. This is the right, Paola, more or less? Yeah, that's right. Spain, 600,000. I've seen this morning that it was 800,000. UK Companies House, mandatory filing, 1,400,000 filings. Netherlands, etc. There are 4, we can assess that there are between 5 and 7 millions of XBRL financial statements per year which are available in Europe. This is enormous. The problem is simply to exchange this information between one country or the others. Is there an appetite for that? We have discussed, Sasha, yesterday about that, you remember? And, but I've discussed also with my Italian colleagues and Claudio Bodini, and he said to me, of course there is an appetite. Because, for instance, my clients, he is an accountant, are trying to export. If they want to export, they want to see if the company they are going to export with are reliable companies. And how they can do that? Simply in asking the business registers of the other country if this company is reliable or not. It's a very long process. They cannot understand, in fact, I'm not sure all the Italians are speaking German, so in fact, it's a bit difficult to understand the figures which are in the business registers in the Bundesanzeiger, unless you are doing that in English. Anyway, we have in XBRL Europe made an initiative to make this XBRL information exchangeable and readable from one country to the other with the Business Register Working Group, and we have set up EBR taxonomy, which has been tested between some business registers, like Infocamere, with my good friend Paola Fiumani. I want to mention her, because we made a lot of work concerning that. It was an initiative, a pilot project, and it was very interesting to make that. Some other project outside Europe. It is used, in fact, in also many countries. In the United States, for the banks, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. For the financial market, in fact, US Securities and Exchange Commission, with the mandatory filing of both institutions. In Japan, the Bank of Japan, for all the banks. The financial service agencies, Japan, also for mandatory filing. The National Tax Agency, etc. One I would like to mention, this is the one in India. India, there is the business register, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which set up a mandatory filing for all the companies in India. So you can imagine the numbers of companies in India, you see. I'm not sure that we can compare between India and our countries. I'm going to make a focus because we are speaking about all these data. In fact, all the data are coming first from the supervision. What is the supervision, in fact? The structure of the supervision in the European Union is coming from the European institutions, the European Commission, with Magdalena, not only her, but the European Parliament and the European Council. The European system of financial supervisors is comprised of two levels. The level 2, this is the European Systemic Risk Council, and all the authorities, and that's very important. You see the EBA, EIOPA, and ESMA. These authorities, in fact, are imposing the mandatory filing, at least for EBA and EIOPA, of all the banks and insurance in XBRL. And the level 1, this is the competent of supervisory authority, the national competent authorities, like, for instance, in other countries, like, for instance, the CNMV in Spain, which is an authority. I've made, in fact, this is coming from the Banque de France, and you see that they are the undertakings, which are giving their filings in XBRL to the NCAs. In some cases, it is not totally aggregated, and these NCAs are giving in XBRL to the European authorities. So there is, in fact, a lot of exchange of information. This is very important, that point. The future, because that was the past. The future, this is the new directives. The new directives have been adopted, in fact, by the European Parliament. These directives are for the banks, Basel III CRD4, for the COREP and FINREP reporting of banks. 10,000 of banks in Europe, in fact. The majority of them are going to report in XBRL, COREP and FINREP, the prudential reporting. The insurance, this is Solvency II Omnibus. For the Solvency II reporting, this is the prudential reporting. These reporting are enormous, a lot of information from the banks. 20,000 elements in a taxonomy. So this is enormous. Without a standard, can you imagine to do that just by hand, like in the past? The listed company, the Transparency Directive, I'm going to come back on that. This is for the stock-listed companies. The reporting will be probably in XBRL in 2020. I'm going to come back on that. The non-regulated sector, because they were the regulated sector. The non-regulated sector, for all companies, the accounting directive, which has been voted for in 2013, for annual accounts of non-listed companies, and, of course, this business register, interconnection of business register directive, which have been voted for in 2012, and in which you are involved. This banking and insurance supervision I've spoken about. The Transparency Directive. The Transparency Directive is something which is the future. The directives, in fact, introduce as the XBRL is introduced as the possible standard for the mandatory reporting for all the stock-listed company in the European Union as of the 1st of January 2020. The directives cover the whole supply chain, the filing, the storing, and the availability of data. That is very important. The ESMA, the European Securities Market Authority, is in charge of developing draft technical standards, the content, and of specifying the electronic reporting format, maybe in XBRL. It is through an ESEF task force, which is ESEF, it is European Single Electronic Format Task Force, in which we are sometimes invited, Magdalena and me. We've made some presentations there. The ESMA is in charge of establishing a web portal serving as a European electronic access point for the access of the regulated information. That is very important for you, guys, for you. The system of interconnection of officially appointed mechanism, the OAMs, it will be the web portal of the member states and the member states' central storage mechanism. In developing the interconnection of OAMs, ESMA has to take into account the technical requirements for the system of interconnection of the business registers. Everything is written, you see? And this is in the directive. The accounting directive is adding a layer on that, if I may say so. The accounting directive states that the member states should develop electronic publication systems that allow undertakings to file accounting data, including statutory financial statements, only once. Only once. The gentleman from OECD this morning said that, only once. It's very important. And in a form that allows multiple users to access and use the data easily. With regard to reporting of financial statements, the Commission is encouraged to explore means for a harmonized electronic format. So I think that with the three directives, you are surrounded in a certain way, if I may say so. This directive is opening the way to an harmonized way of using XBRL in the sector of the non-listed companies. And of course, the interconnection of the business register directive, which focuses on some elements to be exchanged, like name, identification number, etc., but it could be more, in fact. Its implementation is made through delegated acts negotiated between the European Commission and the Member States, discussions to set up the BRIS, Business Register Interoperability System, which is managed by, for the project, which is managed by Magdalena. In XBRL Europe, through the EU Business Register Working Group, we advocate with all stakeholders, including the BRIS project, to include XBRL as the format of exchange. Because we think that this is very important to, when you have in your business registers information in XBRL, that this information could be readable and exchanged between the countries. When, like the clients of Claudio was saying to me yesterday, I want to export. How can I assess this company is reliable? So I said that XBRL is an enabler of transparency. As described above, XBRL is largely contributes to transparency of the market in Europe and outside because first, XBRL allows to exchange reusable information, and this is the quiet revolution. This is quiet because in fact, I'm sure many of you didn't know that. XBRL is and will be used in a large number of interlinked domains like the business register, banking sector, the insurance sector, the listed companies and stock exchange, the statistical office, etc. But still, an harmonization of the content in the various sectors help. Most likely, the EU IFRS being built by ESMA will be a milestone because, of course, you are registering in your business registers the financial statement following the local gap. But in order to exchange this information, it should be at least understandable from one country to the other. So at least the content has to be harmonized, or maybe a new content has to be developed. There are some possibilities already to harmonize the reporting. There is there are the European Central Bank, the various authorities are trying to harmonize the reportings and are trying to find the common elements between the different reporting, between the FinRep, between the ECB, between the COREP and the Solvency II. You see that this diagram is showing the intersections between the different taxonomies. But we have to go more in depth in that respect. Just in order to explain you, XBRL International and XBRL Europe, who are we? In fact, XBRL International, this is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of transparency in business reporting. So this is really the scope of this conference. Through the use of XBRL with its regional organization and direct members, we have more or less 650 members. In charge, XBRL International is in charge of the maintenance and the reliability of the standard through its working group. Very important, because the standard has to be stable enough in order to be sure that it is used by everyone. XBRL International organizes XBRL conference, like the next one, which will be in Orlando next week. XBRL Europe, this is a not-for-profit affiliated to XBRL International, which was set up to promote XBRL through its membership, in which we find many business registers, like for instance Infocamere, which is a member of Expert Italy, like Infograph, which is a direct member of Expert France, of Expert Europe, sorry. We find many of them. And we have working groups in which you see the Business Register Working Group, which is chaired by Thomas Verdun, the IFRS Securities and Market Working Group, which is chaired by Pierre Hamon, Usability Working Group, Multi-Stakeholder Platform, etc. We organize events every 6 months or so, twice a year. Last one was in Rome. It was 3 weeks ago, organized by Expert Italy, in which Vito made a brilliant presentation. Thank you. And in fact, the next one will be in Brussels. And we've seen this morning with Anna that I can announce that the one which is after will be in Madrid, close to the next ECRF event. We have seen that together. Yes, that's right. And in order to show you the status of the consortium worldwide, you see that there are, in fact, many jurisdictions, because it is organized with local jurisdictions like Expert Italy, like Expert Germany, like Expert France, etc. And you see that many of them are in Europe. This is normal, because Europe is more scattered than any other place. But at least you see that Europe is very advanced. And you have seen that the presentation I've made with the number of projects, this is reflected by this slide, in which you find all desk entries. And this is the end of my presentation, with a picture of some years when I was younger. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Gilles. Have a sit. I'll have a couple of questions from my panelists, and I invite you to raise yours. The first question goes to Magda. And I'm going back to your challenge about striking the balance here, the final, whether the controller there can put on the final slide of Magdalena, the 9th place. And it's referring, Magda, to two questions. Public data and burden on companies. Generalize, who has to hold the burden, okay, of registration? My question is, we have seen the benefits of data going as public as possible, as interoperable as possible, not just in Europe, but all over the world. And I think that your organization stands exactly for that. My question is public a matter of authority or is it a matter of markets, first? Second, if it's a matter of markets, shall we put the burden on registration or the burden on access? Provided the fact that, again, open doesn't mean free, and somebody has to pay the bill. And not necessarily taxpayers are willing to pay for an asymmetric public good like business data are, okay? They are asymmetric. One thing is the OECD, another thing is business data. And of course, I include also Michele for any comment about the legal challenge for this. So, Magdalena, first question, is public a matter of authority or a matter of markets, okay? And which is the relevant market, Europe or the world? Are Europeans delivering too much transparency and not being reciprocated by others? First question. Second, who pays for what? Registration or extraction? I don't know whether there are any questions in between or adding on my challenge, but feel free, raise your hand, raise yourself, raise to the sky, but just let yourself known, okay?
Okay, thank you for the questions. I thought I would get away with me asking the questions, but it doesn't seem so. These are very, very difficult questions, in my opinion. So I'm really afraid I may not have the answers here, but I can only say, on the first one, I think I stick to my idea that we need to be able to find a balance. you're asking, is it about authority or is it about the markets? It's about the both. Maybe more about the markets, I tend to believe, but that's my personal opinion, all right? Who should pay for that? Again, both. Maybe there's a pay.
Again, both. That's a typical European Commission answer, okay? When in doubt,
I don't know
ask
what he
money to
means.
everybody. Thank you very much. Make a choice, my friend. Okay. Both, okay. Why both? Is that any economic sense of charging both sides? I mean, if you want to collect data as frequent, as much, and as fast as possible, why do we want to charge businesses? I mean, the public welfare is maximized when you lower transaction costs, right? Okay, so why charging businesses for that?
I think that's a question for the business registers. So, people
Okay,
in the
Magda,
room.
I see you are a
Because-
tough guy, tough person.
The EU legislation only says you can charge, and that cost should not be higher than the administrative cost of you doing that registration.
Gilles?
So,
In fact, this is a question a bit strange in a certain way, because what is the difference between the past and now and the future? In fact, in the past, when you want to extract some information from a private company, you have to pay anyway. If you want to extract information from, if you are from Italy and you want to extract some information for a German company, you have to pay some fees to Bundesanzeiger. In the future, with XBRL, it will be the same in a certain way. This is not different. What is different is the fact that there will be a quicker access to the information, an accuracy to this information, and that is the most important point in a certain way. What is also to be said is that the benefit for all the stakeholders, the public and the institutions, is that it has to be organized. Because for the moment, it was not, from the past, it was not very organized, this access to the information in Europe. As I made in my presentation, the next step will be the worldwide to access to the information. But at least already in Europe, we have to organize ourselves. And the European institutions have to play a role, a strong role in that respect, but also the business registers through the ECRF have to play a role in that respect.
Yes, Gilles, but we are heading towards a great experiment, which is the banking union of Europe, right? And if you keep a disaggregated approach and a very random approach to who's going to pay for registration or for extraction, you have a very asymmetric situation in Europe, in which banks will have the same regulation, the same rules, but access to business information will be different. So this may introduce discrepancies and distortion to the allocation of money. We already have a problem of different capital costs in Europe, and we shall see tomorrow Mr. Super Mario, what Super Mario will be doing for SMEs, paying capital 3 times as much as large enterprises and paying taxes twice as much as large enterprises. And the problem is that SMEs that desperately need low-cost business data available all over Europe, if they are to grow, they have to face the same symmetric cost, which is not the case.
Yes, but do you think that if we stay at the same level than now or in the past, it will be better?
No, I'm just asking what's ahead. I mean, we're going to have the banking union. What about having at least a harmonized business model for European business registers? And not just an harmonized standard, the protocol, your business version as opposed to your technological state.
No, because in fact, this is working in parallel. In fact, XBRL is showing simply that you need an harmonized content. This harmonized content I've spoken about. ESMA is working on an harmonized content for the listed companies. But ESMA will introduce a part for the SMEs. And this is the reason why this is the first step of making an harmonized content for the SMEs in Europe. it's a first step. But I mean, in my opinion, the business registers have to work really with these authorities in order to define that correctly.
Michele, do you want to add anything about that? Is lack of harmonization in the business models, in the format, a problem for legal transparency in your idea? You can use this if you want.
Okay.
Here we go.
Well, I think that it is worth pointing out that when we say that the private has to bear the burden or does not have to bear the burden, it must be said that the private is not just business registers. I mean, it is companies, it is intermediaries. And I think that looking at a specific case, which is the money laundering field and the anti-money laundering field, it seems to me that what happened between the third anti-money laundering directive and the fourth anti-money laundering directive is that this burden of disclosing information of beneficial ownership, for example, just passed from the intermediary group to the private company group. So it remained within the private. Looking at this specific field of money laundering, it seems to me that the burden since 10 years until now has always been borne by the private sector. The public sector at European level has not invested a lot in this disclosure information. I can say this since I'm not an institution, so I have taken a position between the two.
Thank you, Michele. We have a question here. Please introduce yourself. May we have what we call a microphone, a gelato. We call it a gelato in Italy, ice cream.
Sorbetto.
Thank you, sorbetto. Thank you, girls. Any other question you want to book? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris Taggart from Open Corporates. I've got a question for Magdalena. Just from the Commission's point of view, I wonder if you could explain, you seem to equivocate about the charging mechanism, and I wonder if you could explain what you consider to be the societal benefits and the benefits for innovation and for a single market in restricting access to company data, not making it open data, not make it free. So what would you think would be the benefits to not making it open, making it free across Europe for the market, for innovation, actually for anti-corruption, anti-fraud, anti-money laundering too?
Okay, thank you, Chris. If I understand your question correctly, you refer to the information that is disclosed in the business registers, and from my point of view, I can only talk about what is required by company law, by company law at EU level. Indeed, we do have a list of documents that need to be disclosed by companies, and according to EU law, which actually is the Directive on Business Registers adopted just 2 years ago, there will be a set of data that will be provided for free by all registers. It's not a huge set of data, but I think it's a good step already. And that includes company name, registration number, and registered office, and also what we call the legal form, which is the type of company. So it doesn't look like a lot, but it is the first time that EU law says this set of data will always be provided for free. Now, apart from that, there's all sorts of other types of documents that should be filed by companies. And for those, business registers can choose whether to charge.
I understand they can choose, but what would be the benefits?
From that point on, is the choice of the respective national register to charge or not. And as far as we know, the practices are very different, from several registers being completely open and providing pretty much all the data for free for the public, to other registers where, I don't know, the extreme would be that you even have to pay to make a search. I'm just saying that would be really the other extreme. So in that respect, it's not about the EU law, it's about the choices of the individual registers, I think.
Sure, but thinking about what comes next and in terms of the future directives and future work, do you see any benefits towards a better single market, towards innovation, towards removing the link between companies and crime, between any of that information being restricted to only those who pay, for example?
I think the benefits are obvious for everyone. There's been studies around which show what you can do if you use data, if you have access to it. And even this morning we saw presentations on the use of big data, the benefits of maybe using open data as well, implementing your data as open data. So surely no one can deny that. Now, how can we get to have all the registers doing this? That's a very tough question. And even if tomorrow the Commission comes with a proposal like that, I wouldn't be certain that the end of the legal process would actually go towards full openness and full transparency.
Thank you.
Yeah, there is the issue of price discrimination for data access across Europe anyway, because if you don't harmonize the prices, of course you have differentiated cost, and therefore you can not maximize the public welfare. You're kind of destroying the idea of public good. One thing is to make it open, another thing is to make it free, but it's a different thing to make it with different prices, okay? Because otherwise, if my prices are monopolistic and if my prices are very high, of course I can distort the ability of third party to access to my data set. I think that we should proceed with the discussion on this and on building on a very relevant question. What maximizes public welfare? What kind of price level? Full openness, not necessarily free of charge. Introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Andres from the Spanish Business Registers. All this debate about the free data or not free data is very interesting, but I think we have to respect every country's system. For instance, in Spain, we have a system where the data is not free, you have to pay for that. And the reason is because the register is self-financing. So it doesn't cost any money to the taxpayers. So I think the government can use that money that in other countries they use for the register for any other social meanings or whatever. So at the end, a business register is for businesses. So the users are the businesses, so if they want to get profit of the business register, they have to pay for that. Because as Anna explained before, the registration in our system gives added value to the businesses. So I think that's a delicate issue to speak very, without strong support. Besides of that, the problem, as someone said this morning, of free data is that at the end, some private companies are going to get profit of that free data to commercialize it. The problem we have in Spain is that we have paid data, but it's very cheap. So private companies are getting massive data from the business registers, and they are commercializing that data. And they have to pay for that, and they even do it. So think, what will they do if that data is free at European or global level? That's it.
Thank you. I don't know whether Magda, you want to comment or Gilles?
Just to say, I think your answer only proves my point that sometimes the business model of the registers is the simple answer to Chris' question. So,
if I may, I agree with you. In fact, the evolution of the data to exchange, the evolution of the innovation is changing maybe progressively the business models of the business registers. But in my opinion, what you said concerning the specificity of the business register in each country has to be preserved in a certain way, and provided that there is enough information, provided that there is innovation in the provision of information, but this is the evolution of the business model of each of the companies, in fact. This is always like that.
Very quickly, as a researcher, as a user of data, I would pay a higher price for better data. I think that price harmonization is important, but also some data harmonization or service harmonization shall be prior to price harmonization. For sure. So I totally agree. And why to pay a price for a PDF and the same price for a good XBRL data, maybe linked with other open sources?
Exactly. I mean, I'm very often astonished that some persons are saying that it is better to use printed information or PDF information, while it is possible now to use extracted information directly from the information system from a company, which is more accurate or at least more reliable than the printed information. When we have made this assessment, the first assessment of the accuracy of the information in 2005, 2006, 2007, we've seen that a lot of information was rekied, a lot of information was reused by the data analyst, which was wrong information because simply in the registers, whatever the registers, in fact the information was not very accurate. So as you say, the point is that, and the innovation I was speaking about, it is you were speaking about, it is exactly that in that area.
Okay, it seems that the level of your glycemic commands more attention to the pasta than to my panel. Therefore, I declare the session ended, and thank you very much to my panelists, and see you in 1 hour and 15 minutes, 2:30, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, have a safe dinner. Ciao.